Alright, so welcome to my first major YouTube video I'm putting out. So this is like a tutorial for the CS50 introduction to programming with Python, and it's more like a tutorial stroke walkthrough of how I came up with the solutions for this lines of code task in the week 6, I think week 6. So let's just jump straight to the task and we'll work our way up. So it says one way to measure the complexity of the program is to count its number of lines, including blank lines and comments. For instance, a program like this: say hello, name, input, what's your name, printf. Okay, so it says has just 2 lines of code, not 4, since the first line is a comment and its second line is blank. That's not that many, so odds are the program isn't that complex. Of course, just because a program has more lines of code than another doesn't necessarily mean it's more complex. For instance, a function like this is a function is even that takes in a parameter n. It's just a basic function. So let's just jump into the main task we have. So it says, in a file called lines.py, implement a program that expects exactly one command line argument, the name or path of a Python file, and I'll put the number of lines of code in that file, excluding comments and blank lines. If the user does not specify exactly one command line argument, or if the specified file name does not end in py, or if the specified file does not exist, the program should instead exit via sys.exit. Assume that any line that starts with hash, which is how you start a comment, optionally preceded by white spaces, is a comment. A docstring should not be considered a comment. Assume that any line that only contains white space is blank. And so we have a hint over here. It says, recall that a stir, which is string, comes with quite a few methods. This is the link to the Python library for the documentation of string methods. So we have else strip. Now the else strip, what it does, it strips white lines or white spaces from the left side of a string. And we also have starts with. What it does is it checks a string for if it starts with a specific character or characters. So that's what this does. Now it also says, note that open can raise a file not found error, and this is the link to that. You might find it helpful to test your program on e.g. some of week 6's source code, as well as on programs of your own. Now, these are just there are examples of how the program is supposed to work. So let's see. Now we can pause this. So imputing Python lines.py without just the lines.py as the only argument, you get a too few command line arguments. If we input Python lines.py with 4 as the second argument, it says not a Python file because it doesn't end with a py. Now, third example, Python lines.py full and bar. Now, full and bar does not end with py, and also it's more than 2 arguments, so we get too many command line arguments. Now we have, for the fourth example, Python lines.py full.py. Now, full.py, of course, full ends with .py, but we don't have it in our file, so it says file does not exist. Now, we input Python lines.py hello.py, which is a file from our previous task we did, and it gives us 2 because hello.py, if we go back up here, we just have this name, this first line, and this second line. So how do we, it says, how do we continue? We make this directory, we go into the directory, and we make the file. So let's begin. I already have the directory made, but if we try to create a directory, it will give us an error. It says cannot create directory lines file exists. So like I said, I was playing with this earlier, so let's just go straight and create that file. So we go into that directory lines. Now we create the file code lines. Why am I always writing lies? Lines.py. Alright, so now jumping straight to solving this problem. Okay, we can start by importing the module sys, because we're going to be using the system arguments, the command line arguments. So that's the module for that. Now we can start by creating our main function, and we can come back to this. We can first of all, we can then create a second function that checks for the argument. So we can call it check arg, and it takes in a parameter. Let's just say arg as well. Now we can say, since we're checking for how many arguments, so we can say if the length of sys.arg v is less than 2, we should then print too few command line arguments, just like it says here. So we can copy this and can say print too few command line arguments. I'm sorry about the noise. I have my neighbors probably working on some woodwork. So we can then say it says we should exit. Alright, it says if we run this and it gives us this error, we should exit with 6.exit. So these are the same examples that are here. So let's continue. So we should exit with 6.exit with an error code of 1. Now this is for checking if it's less than 2. Now let's check if the argument will be more than 2. So we say elif the length of sys.argv is greater than 2. Now what we're going to do is print too many arguments, too many command line arguments. So let's just copy that and type print too many command line arguments. And once again, I'm really sorry about the noise. So we exit this with an error code of 1 as well. Now we're going to also check now, since we're still checking for the arguments. Now we're going to check if the argument on the second part is if it ends with .py. Now how do we do this? We say if not sys.argv and 1. Remember in programming we use indexes, and the first index is supposed to be 0 and the second is 1. So that's why we have 1 here. So we say if not sys.argv, then we can add the method lower, just in case the person or the user imputes uppercase, so it turns it to a lowercase. Now for the main one, we check if it ends with .py. If it ends with .py, we should print and let's just say we print not a Python file like so. Now we're also going to exit with a code of 1. So let's work on our second function. So we define the function count lines. It takes an argument or parameter of, let's call it file. Alright, so now since we're going to count lines, we have to keep track of the number we're counting, and we're going to create a variable called count, and we're going to initialize it with 0. Now we have our try block, and we're going to open our file with the with keyword open. So f string, we're going to use an f string here. Now our first parameter, we're going to say sys. So this is the file we're opening, which is our first parameter. We're going to open it and then run a for loop that will go through each lines and check for the comments and the white spaces. So we call that file, say alt v, our second parameter, because of in programming we usually start with the index of 0, 0 being the first and 1 being the second. So this is our second parameter in our command line argument. So we're going to open out this particular file here as file, if I can spell correctly. So let's call it file. Now this file is different from this. This is just a parameter for this function. Now this is a name we're calling this. So we call it, so we say file dot read lines. Now the read line is a method that we use to read lines of a file. So it could be a CSV file, it could be a TXT file. It's just a method we use to read lines. Now we're going to store this in a variable called lines. There we go. So now let's create our for loop. We create our for loop. We say for line in lines. So what are we going to do? We're going to say line.strip. Now what this does, it removes, we could say strip, which removes white spaces from the left side, but we're just removing white spaces. We're just going to remove white spaces from both sides. Now we can store this in a variable called, let's say, stripped. So we say let's have an if statement here. We say if stripped, which is this line, if true, if we've removed this and it's true, that is, it's equal to white space we continue. What this means, if it is that there's a white space, let's just keep it. That's what this continue means. If it is that there's white space, let's just keep it. We're not going to count any white space here. We're just going to skip it. Okay, so we're going to use another if statement and says if strict dot start with. Now, if this line that we're iterating through, if it starts with a hash, meaning if it starts with a comment, if it starts with a hash, we're just going to skip it. We'll say continue, meaning we just skip it. We're not going to count it at all. So what we want are the actual lines of code. That is what we're going to count. So we're going to skip that, and then we say count. Now we're going to actually count our lines there. So we say count equals count plus 1. So each time we go through this line, based on we're iterating through this file, each line we go through, and there's no lines, there's no white spaces, and there's also a comment. It skips those, and once it sees the actual line of code, it increments the count variable by 1. So it goes through the loop until everything in that line. Now, what we're going to do is come out of our for loop and print count. This will display how many we have counted after the loop has run. So this is a try block. For our except block, we say except file. Remember, it has to start with a capital letter. So we say file not found, error. Sorry about this. So it's a file not found error, except there's a file not found error. When there is, we print this string that says not a Python file as well, not a Python file. So let's just call our main function down here. So we're going to do this if name equals main. Equals main. We're going to have this here. So what we're going to do, we're going to call our main function down here. Now what this does is, when we create a Python module and we're using it in another file, this helps us mitigate calling the whole program. So let's say we make this Python module and we're calling it in another file, and we just want to call this count lines function. So this will help us not run this whole program. It will just be calling this. It just helps us not run the whole program once we call it there. So that's what this does. So now in our main file, in our main function, now we're just going to call this check.argv. So check.argv, argv, check.argv function. We call this function with a parameter. So the argv, now we are going to have an if statement that says if the length, we're going to be checking for the length of the argument. If it is less than or equal to 1 or less than or equal to 2, we're going to call this whenever, let's say this, if it's less than 1 or equal to, so we say len sys.argv, and we're going to be calling using our index 1 here. Okay, no, it's just we're checking for the total length right now. Checking for the total length. So if the length of sys.argv is less than or equal to 2, we're going to call this count lines function. So count lines, and we're going to have passing a parameter or an argument of this argv. Now our actual second argument, that is what we're going to be checking, so the index of 1. So there it is. So now let's check if what we've done is correct. Now before now I added a file which we're going to use to check this, which is one of the previous exercises or tasks we did, the field task. I don't remember what week that was, so I added it in the folder of this where this other file is located. So now we're still inside this directory, and the fill.py file is also in this directory. So we're going to say python lines.py. This is our first argument. Now our second argument, which is this and this, our second argument is going to be fill.py. now if all goes correct, it is going to count just the lines of code minus the white spaces and the comments. Now in this my own program I don't have any comments, but in that other one I have comments. So let's just run the code and see if it works. Okay, it says this check v is not defined in line 4. Okay, I made an error. So it's supposed to be arg. This is just a function name. I thought I was still writing the full argv. so I'm sorry for that. Now if we clear this and start again and say Python lines.py, and our other file we'll be using to test this. So it says we have 25 lines of code. So now if we go here and copy this and we check our program to see if we pass. Okay, let's just give it some time to complete, and not long. Okay, now we passed everything. So that is how you tackle this lines.py task. Alright, I hope this helps you, and like I said, this is my first YouTube video, and I'll try to make some other tutorials or lessons, or what do I call it? Let's just call it a tutorial. So I'll try to make more. So I'm actually still taking the CS50 programming with Python. So for each one I complete, I'll try to make a video of it. So I hope it helps. So thank you once again for watching, and please do subscribe. Thank you.